So I have a migraine for the first time in my entire life.
Okay.
So that's my flu game. Just letting you know.
Your flu
Okay.
game. Okay.
No, I appreciate that. I would not have been offended if you were just like.
Nah, I don't miss shows. This is show business, and the show must go on.
You all have like a crazy dedication. So you all take off for this show sometimes, right?
Yeah, because Josh is soft. So
But don't.
Ben and I never miss.
Yeah, you two have like. Wasn't there like?
No, we did miss one.
Yeah, because as you all know,
Yeah.
you all the first compound news thing that I ever listened to.
First time, long time.
There we go. First time, long time. Wait, we gotta get.
Ben, when's the last time we took off? One of us was in Disney.
You were at Disney.
I was in Disney.
I recorded from Disney. Duncan is recorded from Disney.
I'm always like.
You were the one who punked out. Is this one mine or his?
No.
Oh, my bad.
I don't know which one's
Was
which.
it you then that was like in the lobby of a hotel in Disney trying to?
No, that was on. I was on Marco Island and my internet wouldn't work, so I was literally in the lobby of a hotel doing it. They're like, "We don't have any other good internet, so you're gonna have to do it from here."
Ben patched in via fax.
Yeah.
What's that?
Nothing much. I think I've been waiting for Josh, you to like. Let's go. I've been waiting for you to eventually after this.
Where's mine? Oh, these ones.
Yeah.
Eventually after this intro that you have with this like secret producer that you never tell anybody about, like the beat for the theme of the show is hot.
I am the producer.
Okay, you did
Yes.
it. Okay, it wasn't J. Cole.
I'm a rapper producer. I think that
Who does make our music?
Josh is the Pharrell of Ritholtz Wealth.
Who's the Pharrell of podcasts?
oh no, we don't ever give up the beat maker. No, because everyone's always biting our shit. So like the last thing we want to do is give them more of an opportunity to try to do what we're doing. You know what I mean? So like that's a sacrosanct.
Get your own mix, man.
Yeah,
I'm just
yeah,
waiting for you, like eventually after the lead-in, to just like start dropping a verse.
Yeah,
you know?
no. Next time you come here, I'm gonna have turntables in front of me too.
There we go.
Absolutely.
So I have a question for you guys.
Go ahead.
What the 818,000 revision?
Yeah.
What was that about? Does that?
Why all of a sudden is there a revision of 800,000 jobs from 2023?
Yeah. Do
Yeah.
we?
Yes. Well, essentially, the government does its best every month, right, to basically assess, payrolls, reaching out to establishments. That's the establishment survey. That's where we get the monthly jobs number, right? There's a household survey. That's where we get the key ratios, like the unemployment rate, labor force participation, things like that. Now, once a year goes by in Q1 or through Q1, they go back and they look at basically, it gets complicated, like everything with BLS and the rest of the government, because they are doing like really gritty work that takes time. So they go back and, as I understand it, look at state UI. So it's like state jobless claims. And after a year passes, that's actually really, really reliable data. And the government economists essentially and the statisticians defer to that count. And they say, we're going to revise back towards that. So sometimes actually it's revising up, right? If you go back and look at the years, I don't think we have a chart of that.
But I guess my question is like, not the 818 itself, but I don't even remember this being a thing. Like, does this happen once a year? Do we do it every quarter?
I'll explain it. It's because it's an election year. No, this is true. So in 2019, they went back and revised 2019 by 500,000 jobs.
Yeah, Bloomberg showed all the years.
Yeah, it happens. But like the Democrats didn't seize on that as like a talking point for the 2020 election.
No.
It just was like, oh, okay, there was a revision. Nobody really cares.
But it's a thing that happens every year, once a year?
The revisions aren't usually this large, but revisions are common. But this year it becomes a political talking point because effectively the Harris campaign owns the Biden economic record. She's in the White House, and so that's why it's noisier this year than usual. I think what's hilarious is the stock market rallied on that news.
Yeah,
but it's weird because everyone seemed to know that the revision was coming.
Yeah, well, because
like the down, it was going to be a big downward revision. Everybody knew that.
The expectation was 600-something thousand, and it was 800-something thousand.
Some people go to economists to see whether they should care about this or not. I looked at the stock market. The stock market didn't care.
So wait, so worse than expected, meaning that the Fed is going to cut. Was that the market's reaction?
I think the market had already basically shifted to the idea that they are cutting basically as close to for sure as market pricing can get. I actually don't think the pricing for 50 changed that much.
But they can't go 50 right away, though. That's like just human nature. Unless it was a crisis, because that'd be them admitting they were wrong. And I feel like they have ego
agree with
involved.
that.
They would never do it for ego purposes. Go 51st and say, nope, we were wrong. We should have done it earlier.
I think if you got like a monster ugly payroll on, let's see, the first Friday of September, because it's always the first Friday of the month that you get NFP. Maybe that it would be a saving grace in terms of the embarrassment or not. But like I do think there's a situation which would be not even that human tendency to not want to admit you're wrong.
There's a 20 some odd % chance of a 50 basis point cut right now being priced in. So not everyone agrees that they wouldn't do it. I don't think they'll do it for exactly the reason that you said. If you are accustomed to doing 25, you don't want to look like you missed a step and do 50, especially after everyone thought you already should have done 25. So I think for that reason they probably won't. But we also have more data coming. So to your point, like if it's really bad, that'll be their opportunity to say, "Hey, we're doing 50 because we're data dependent."
Yeah, but to Ben's point, they are human, and like they hear everybody screaming at them, "You're late! You're late! You're offside!"
And they're pushing back.
How do you think Jerome Powell makes his hamburgers? That's an Animal Spirits TCAF crossover.
How does he grill a burger? I don't think he does. My sense is this is not a man who is preparing a lot of meals for himself.
Oh, remember you saw Schumer throw a piece of cheese on the raw hamburger? Did you see that?
I did see that. He deservedly got roasted.
That was a shonda.
Yeah.
John, how we feeling?
I think we're looking pretty good. How you doing, Doug? All right. Let me come in with the claps.
Nervous anticipation.
Friends, episode 154.
All right. At public.com, you can earn 5.1% APY with a high-yield cash account. That's not just a good rate, it's literally an industry-leading rate. Plus, no fees, zero, so you can maximize your interest. What's the point of earning a high yield if you have to spend a bunch of it on fees? At public.com, it's just 5.1% APY, straight up, no strings attached, and no balance requirements. Use as little or as much of a deposit as you'd like. This is a paid endorsement for public investing, 5.1% APY as of June 17th, 2024, and is subject to change. Full disclosures in the podcast description. Let's go. Compound and Friends episode, what is it, 154? I like that shirt. What is that, like a woven material? Let me see. I like that. John Stylen. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the best investing podcast in the world. My name is Downtown Josh Brown. I'm here with a couple of really great market/economic commentators. I can't wait for you to hear the show. First things first, I don't have a written intro for Ben Carlson. Ben Carlson is the head of institutional asset management here at Ritholtz Wealth Management. When did you join the firm? 15? 14?
We're just talking about it.
15?
It's been 10 years.
It's been 10 years.
Almost.
Dude.
He minored in economics.
Right. Ben is the co-host of Animal Spirits with Michael Batnick, the longest running podcast here at the firm. And as they were discussing previously, they never miss an episode. You guys are on
Except
every
one time.
Except one time. What was the reason for the one-time miss? What happened?
I was in Disney.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
Fair
For
enough.
the kids.
They only have one childhood, Michael. You should be missing more shows,
I literally
quite
left
frankly.
my kids at Disney and went to podcast when I did it.
Joining us today for the first time, Talmon Smith is an economics reporter for the business section of the New York Times. Talmon covers macroeconomic developments, labor markets, and financial markets. Prior to this role, Talmon spent time on the opinion section of the Times at a nonpartisan think tank on campaign finance and worked at GQ magazine. Welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me. This is a real pleasure, a real privilege.
So this is from your New York Times bio page. Depending on the day, week, or month, I may be covering breaking news related to key economic data, traveling across the country to write about a community that is representative of a broader economic trend, or staring into my laptop all day, making phone calls, working on an explanatory or investigative article. It's something relates to the distribution of people, money, and power. Chances are it is of interest to me. we talk to a lot of journalists who cover the markets and the economy. Not to the diminishment of what they're doing, but I feel like your perch is maybe important's the wrong word, but you kind of like there's maybe a higher level of sensitivity given how many readers the Times has and given how emotional people get when the paper of record says something. Would you agree with that?
Oh,
do you feel that?
Yeah. Just first off, I remember being cringy about having to do a first-person bio because it's this big change at the paper because it's always this third-person thing. Like you have input, but then it's kind of nice because somebody else writes nice.
Well, you're not an opinion writer anymore. You're a journalist.
No, but newsroom side and opinion side used to have it. And then I did it, and I was like, you know what? This is breaking the fourth wall. It's more honest. It's more conversational. So I've actually gotten used to and actually kind of like the first-person intro. To your question, yeah, I mean the block is definitely hot. But I think deservedly so. Like if you have the privilege of that perch, if you put it, it's on you to do your best work, do the homework, learn, admit when you're wrong, either after publication or ideally when you're doing the work, before you put out a news article or a feature, et cetera, et cetera. And it's really rewarding. Like and honestly, when I get heavy criticism, especially from readers or hyper subject matter experts that really know what they're talking about. Like you just take it to heart, and either you fade it a bit because you think they're overlooking this or that, or you fully incorporate it and recognize it for what it is. I think that's
well. The block is hot because you're not writing for a Substack of people who have deliberately subscribed to you because they're interested in what you have to say.
Right.
You're writing for the world. You're writing for policy. I don't mean to make you nervous when I do this, but you know this. You're writing for every economist reads what the New York Times is saying about the economy. Every policymaker is paying attention. So that is like definitely an elevated plateau to be standing upon.
Did you have to develop a thick skin really quickly from hearing feedback from the comment section and from people on Twitter and people in your inbox?
I think I've always just maybe it's just growing up playing sports. Like there's just a lot of, can you say the crap word? Yeah, like a
crap
lot.
Word. You could say literally anything you want.
There's a lot of shit talking, right? Like just as a boy growing up playing sports, I ran track, played soccer. I was awful at tracks and I just switched to focusing on soccer.
Same.
It gets rowdy, but like as long as it's all honest and like above board, like I don't know, you kind of just like take it on the chin, and also like some like more than half of everybody involved in this, I mean, huge nerds, right? Like honestly, the further I've gone into my career, the more I spend time with Wall Street and financial world folks, and like they're much more slick. I mean, they're nerdy as well, but and they're also intellectually rigorous, but especially when you're dealing with labor market economists. And sort of more anthropological people and academics, they're really just trying to nail it down and get it right. So
a lot of times the feedback's helpful. It helps you learn, right?
Yeah.
I was going to say these are people that eat, sleep, and breathe these very narrow topics, but they know them inside and out. And you're trying to be a little bit more general and just incorporate things from these topics.
Right.
But these people live there.
Right.
And so you can understand like the magnifying glass that they have on whatever your comments are on these topics.
Right. And the trick of it, right, is to layer, right? So just no matter what you do in any of this world are shared worlds. It's like, okay, well, we all know a table itself is only so helpful, right? So then, we make charts, right? And the chart is a great data visual. Sometimes it's, dot plot, scatter plot, but then you might want to look at, let's say it's a chart about a certain sector. And then you're like, well, let me reach out to the firm of the guy that's doing coverage for that sector, talk to him on the phone. Then you're like, okay, I learned a lot from that. Your notebook fills up based on that. And then you're like, okay, well, now I have 5 other questions for somebody that might actually be operating that sort of business. Call him on the phone, realize, okay, maybe it's worth a trip out to this factory, this ranch, this restaurant, this boat. And then you go there, and then, on the side or, before or after, a certain event or a certain tour, kind of pull workers aside, get their perspective, and then that all adds up, right? So there is the pressure of like, I wouldn't call myself a journalist at all, but, it is a general interest publication. So you have to make it accessible. But the most offensive thing you could do both to people's experiences on the ground or to experts that really know what the hell they're talking about, is dumb something down. But it has to be distilled.
You spend a lot of time with people that fill out the surveys, that answer the surveys that we've spent the last year plus talking about.
Yeah.
And we're saying, like, what is the disconnect? From your point of view, what did you hear from these people? Like, how do you explain the disconnect between the soft and the hard data?
Yeah. I think it's changed across this cycle in terms of how to best explain it. I think everybody could understand how scary, annoying, and unmoored like June 22 felt like, right? So in that case, I feel like the hard data and the soft data were actually quite aligned. But, yes, as we got into 2023 and even 2024, the divergence was amazing. And it wasn't just consumer sentiment, right? NFIB, which, I kind of throw that in there with LEI in terms of the soft data. Well, the LEI is supposed to be somewhat predictive, so it's slightly different. But, I wouldn't say that NFIB, I should say, is like the best indicator. But it was NFIB and other surveys like that, as well as consumer sentiment. And when I drill down, I just think, it was such a volatile change. People are pegged to 2019, and they had low interest rates, low inflation. It was a really long, boring, and probably too slow expansion. But nevertheless, there was a virtue in that. And then all of a sudden, we're in this snow globe, and it gets just shaken up, right? And that itself is volatile, right? I mean, people were worried about, their livelihoods and their like literal lives. And then there's this sort of euphoria when it's like, oh my God, the vaccines were supposed to take like 4 or 5 years potentially?
Yeah.
And then it took, however many months. Shout out to the Trump administration for Operation Warp Speed and all the brilliant scientists that actually contributed to doing that groundwork.
I think the volatility that you talk about is a big part of it. Like back in the late 1800s, early 1900s, they were used to that. There was a recession like every 24 months.
Right.
Inflation, we'd go huge inflation, then deflation, and back and forth. And the last 20 or 30 years, the Fed is essentially, not just the Fed, have taken a lot of the volatility out of the economy, and we're just not used to it.
Yeah. We're a less interest rate sensitive economy too. We're a services economy. Services are, it takes a real big shock to the labor market for services to fall apart. And then to just wrap up in terms of the most direct part of your question, I think even once, and this was so predictable, that even once inflation itself, the rate of price increases had settled, people were still going to be upset because it takes a while for people to stop being upset about something that had literally just happened to them. I remember being in a meeting at the Times with my colleagues, and I was speaking with, actually, I think this might have been on background off the record, so I cannot say who it was, but a very high official in the administration on the economic side, like tippy top. And
of what, the Biden administration?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And
so you could say it was Kamala.
It was not. Okay. It was not Vice President Harris. But I think this was July of 2023. So this was like peak first level soft landing euphoria. And I was like, look, everybody's happy right now, but the narrative is going to change very quickly to, price levels are still high. And I was like, so what's your plan? Because this, not for me, not to make me happy, but like, what's your plan for real Americans out there that are concerned about that? How are you going to message that? That is tough to message. Some people don't even quite understand. Just intuitively they do, but like, mechanically they don't quite understand the difference between rate of change and level. Like, and also, do you have things to sort of targetedly, bring down, price levels on a sector by sector thing? You all have talked about, antitrust and da-da-da. And there was an answer, but it was a bit meek and sort of.
There's only really one answer, and that is invent a time machine. And
prices don't go back down.
They don't go back down. I mean, selectively in some categories, but in general, that's at the heart of why part of the unpopularity of Biden in the context of a 3.6% unemployment rate is that, number one, most people just, if you say to them, yeah, inflation is up cumulatively 27% across the economy over 3 years, and that's terrible. But also, you got a wage gain of 18%. They're like, well, A, I'm still behind, and B, I got that raise because I'm really good at my job.
Right.
Okay. All right, fine.
Yeah.
So you're not going to win that, and you shouldn't even try. And then the second part is what Ben just said. We're we're not having the same conversation. People experience inflation as prices,
right,
not rate of change.
Right.
They're not worried about, well, what was it 3 months ago versus 6 months ago?
Right.
And did it only go up 1% versus 3%?
Right.
All they know is this thing used to be 5 and now it's 8 and it's not going back to 5.
Yeah, and there are plenty of people that I've met all across the country who were able to refi down to, because there are a lot of people that are not, in the top quintile of the country that are still homeowners, right? I think 2/3 of American households are homeowners. They too got to often refi down to 3 or below. Yeah. And a lot of these, I met a nurse, and I think I put this in the story that I did, basically traversing Pennsylvania for a week and a half. I met a nurse that went from $40,000 in 2020 to like 80 something.
What, in income?
Yeah. So that's like
100%, it sounds like.
Yeah. I mean, that's a crazy increase. And yet, to your point, in percentage terms, but he was so focused on the, cumulative change of produce, because he talked about how him and his wife work really hard to eat healthy. And it's just like, how is this cabbage 2x what it was?
Yeah. So it's
frustrating.
The one thing that you can't say as a politician is you are the inflation.
Yeah.
I mean, it's nobody wants to hear that. It's not a winning message. And in a lot of cases, it's the truth. You have a situation where we just didn't have enough people. Period, to do jobs, which means wage inflation, which means the price of everything goes up, and then it becomes a cycle. And I don't think that individual people think too much about it. Again, I just think they look at their own bills, and I totally understand that.
Well, you did that other story about, wasn't it Nebraska had the lowest unemployment rate of any state?
Yeah,
and you were like,
this is in 2022.
You were saying the bartenders were going from job to job to job to job. They're like, someone from down the street hired me and they'd pay me more.
Yeah.
And it was they couldn't find enough people. And you think from the worker's perspective, that's amazing. But then the business owner's perspective, they're probably going, I think that's why a lot of the business surveys were so bad, because they're going, well, this is terrible for our business. We're having to pay our employees more.
Yeah. But the funny thing is, what I found there is that the bosses are actually doing quite fine. And I mean, and you see it in the data. I mean, corporations are doing quite fine. I think there was, I can't remember, there was late 22 or early 23. I don't have the chart in front of me right now, but there was a dip in corporate profits. But then it zoomed right back to all-time
margins
highs,
are
right
still
again.
healthy.
Yeah, margins are actually elevated compared to 2018 and 2019. So, I mean, in a sense, everybody won. But these detailed...
And nobody thinks they won.
Yeah, but
right.
Hey, it's America. What are we going to do? We're going to argue with each other.
So we're going to start with this. Is the Fed a little out of touch? This week, they're very out of touch. This week, they're in Jackson Hole, Wyoming. They're fishing and hiking, and by the time people hear this show, Jerome Powell will have delivered his address, and we don't necessarily know what the theme of the address will be. I don't think it's going to be necessarily a full-blown victory lap, but a lot of people have been highly critical of Fed policy over the last couple of years in unwinding restrictive policy, and I think he's going to want to say something about it. What do you think? What do you think on the scale of 1 to 10 is the degree to which the Fed is out of touch with maybe not even Wall Street, but Main Street, and just how things are really going? Because I feel like they kind of have it right now. I think they have the pulse.
Yeah, I mean, I would say at worst they're probably, and look, we're talking about them as a collective. I'm sure there's somebody that is the most down home, this, and just talking to people in every single sector who are, non-supervisory workers every day, right? And then I'm sure there's somebody that spends all their time in the ivory tower. Again, these are hypotheticals. I'm not actually knocking anybody in the FOMC. But I'd say they're probably as disconnected as anybody that is in the managerial elite and in banking, right? They're central bankers, but they are, in a sense, bankers.
Yeah.
Maybe 7. Like a 6?
Say a 7 in terms of out of touch.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, 6 or 7.
Is that what
more out of touch than Ben?
Yeah, Ben's extremely out of touch.
Flower state guy here. I think where we've shifted from in terms of the vibes is people really hate inflation, but American consumers love to borrow money, and they hate being told borrowing money is more expensive. And I think that's where the Fed doesn't get it, is they can ease the vibes a little bit and make things better if they lower rates and make it cheaper for people to borrow. I think that's does that risk reaccelerating? I don't think it does, but could that risk reaccelerating inflation? But does that increase wage growth if the Fed cuts rates a little bit? I don't see that happening.
I don't think so either. So,
yeah. And I mean, to your point, I mean, wage growth, which some people call wage inflation obviously played some role.
If you call it wage inflation, you're an employer.
Yeah, right? For sure.
Okay.
But like obviously, if for a while at the beginning of the recovery of this cycle, when we were kind of reopening, but depending on the state, you still had unemployment insurance at a jacked up, percentage.
Right.
That allowed some people to say, you know what, I'm not going to work as, in the back of this hot kitchen for a not livable wage, and I'm going to hold out for something better. And then they realize like, oh, I'm in a mountain town. Okay, I'll be a ski lift operator for 16, 17. Now, if you're in a ski town, or that's probably still not great, but you're that much closer to paying your bills, maybe. But also, it's true that a jump from 11 to 17 in percentage terms is pretty large. But I do think that one of the things that I try to do in my job, and over email and on Twitter, and on the phone with sources, is just try to get everybody to speak in a way where like, just imagine that there's a pie, right? And, within the pie are all the reasons that any phenomenon is happening. And I feel like instead, things get so, dichotomized into, is it this or is it that? And I don't know whether that's
I agree with that.
I don't know whether it's like a quote tweet thing. I don't know whether it's a, fence CNBC segment thing.
No, I think it's people just want an answer, and they especially want an answer that agrees with their political feelings.
Yeah. Or just their priors in terms of how they view the economy, which at times isn't perfectly aligned with their politics.
But in terms of where the Fed is with interest rates, I think that interest rates today impact the economy a lot more than the individual. Like most people aren't exposed to borrowing costs because if you have a mortgage, you're locked in. Credit card interest is either way. It's 18%, it's 29%. What's the difference? They're both punitive. But small businesses are big time borrowers and big time reliant on interest rates to fund their businesses. But like most people aren't borrowing money every day.
I think if you're in the housing and mortgage industry, it's like
it's the only thing.
It's the only thing. It's like the sun and everything else revolves around it.
Outside of people that are getting a mortgage today, most individually are not that exposed to interest rates.
Not on a month-to-month basis, right?
It affects all of us much more than it affects each of us.
Yeah, I mean, I think, that's a good point. I mean, I think if you're sort of in, let's say, the bottom third of the income spectrum and the wealth spectrum, you're much more likely to be, rolling over a balance. Obviously, credit card rates, which have, gone up, that affects you. But that's more of a sort of siloed or, big silo, but still a siloed distributional outcome. But to your point about all of us, I do think that when multifamily, which had a great boom recently, but now has, really sort of cooled off, that matters in the aggregate. I talk to a lot of small business people, not even small business people, there's people that own 13 businesses in Houston, I guess small to mid-size. And he was talking about how he tries to have his business model basically over the past 2 to 3 years dependent upon his sales, right? Just bringing enough money to where I don't have to worry about going to my bank because—
Not worry as much about the financing.
The financing, right, yeah, right. Because bank loans, while we see in the data that SLOOS, right? Who knew about SLOOS before this cycle? But the Senior Loan Officer survey, right. Opinion survey, we've seen easing now, but it tightened a lot. And he was like, oh, if you're, like a concert venue person or, a restaurant person or a flower shop, banks will lend to you, but I don't want to guess the rate off the top of my head, but in many cases, double digits.
When the Fed says they're data dependent, are they strictly talking about the hard data? Or do they care about the survey stuff at all?
Does Beige Book factor into rate decisions, or is it really just more color, the feeling in the room?
I think it's more color. Beige is a color.
Right.
Inflation expectations they pay attention to, though, right? Because they want to make sure those aren't anchored, that people expect more inflation, and that becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy.
But that also rolled over.
It rolled over, and look, right, I write about what the options are for our country, for policymakers, and what I'm seeing. And I would never want the job of this is what we should do, because almost certainly I would be wrong, and it's not my place anyway. But one of the oddest things is 1 in 3 year, because there's some surveys that do 3 year, were, they fluctuated a lot more and they got a little bit scary, during, the worst of things, 2022. But 5 year forwards and break evens, okay, there was a brief period, I think, where it got up to 3 or 4, but it snapped back down really quickly when oil did. And it's been pretty tame for a year and a half or so. We have, I think, the chart in there somewhere. But it has been this really wild time where it's just data. I mean, who cared about portfolio management fees and PPI, the producer price index, until I mean, it's been a really fun learning experience.
Oh, it's a good point. Like we used to just say, what's the CPI? And that was good enough for everyone as a shorthand for what's inflation.
Right.
But that's when inflation was like somewhere between 1% and 2%.
Right.
And not really a political issue.
Yeah, where the did supercore inflation come from?
But now everyone's got their own recipe. Right. And which ingredients they want to include and not include to make whatever point they want to make. That's what we all learned. One of the things that we all learned over the last couple of years is how the sausage gets made and how these components are counted.
Yeah, what's CPIX pizza?
No, the shelter component was something that I never really appreciated until it mattered. Yeah. And now nobody wants to know an inflation number that doesn't break out what the shelter component is because it's like a third of it for PCE. Right. Yeah. And it's delivered on the biggest lag of all of the components.
Yeah. So for core PCE, I believe it's in the teens, maybe somewhere between 13 and 18, in terms of the OER weighting, the owner's equivalent rent weighting, which, a lot of people that I really respect do not think has been, appropriately weighted in terms of how seriously we should take it.
Wait, I'm sorry. Have you spoken to people that answer that survey?
No.
Owner's equivalent rent.
No. So I mean,
have you run into a person that answers that call in the wild?
That'd be so interesting. Let's get in. Where do those numbers? Like, how would they know?
They call up an 80-year-old who's been living in the same house for 60 years, and they ask said 80-year-old, "How much do you think you could rent your fucking attic for?" And that's data.
I feel like that would be a good story for you.
So I wrote about that. I wrote about that in it must have been March. Yeah, I think it was in March because there was this big hullabaloo over whether, the Q1 was just a seasonal pop, and it's like, oh, the adjustments have been, made weird by the pandemic, and then everybody that was actually betting on, when I say everybody, I mean the big research shops and on Wall Street, they were essentially expecting. There were some people in the March camp, some people in the May camp, and
what? So the first rate cut?
Yes, I'm sorry, for the first rate cut.
Okay,
all those predictions temporarily got blown up. Now they don't look so dumb. And there was a big debate over, how much of this is auto insurance and owner's equivalent rent? Because there is a version, especially when inflation was everywhere, right? Like in July,
late 21,
from late 21, basically all of 22. If you were doing too much nitpicking and X, these three things,
and people were.
So I'm not here to defend those folks, but it got to a certain point, especially when the labor market, from what I saw in my reporting, was no longer a driving force of, employers saying why they had to raise prices. I thought it became legitimate to ask, okay, well, what are we talking about when we talk about inflation? Let's actually disaggregate. If I'm being paid to talk about the economy and the biggest thing in the economy is inflation, and the same thing goes for somebody that does sell-side research, it makes sense for us to, I guess, earn our pay by digging into the details, because otherwise we should just do the, and those people are very smart too, but the Good Morning America Today Show version of inflation, which is just here's headline and here's core.
Well, have we proven that too much data is probably a bad thing for how people think? Because there's a confirmation bias piece of it, but NPR did this story a number of years ago where they said the economy as a concept didn't really exist before the Great Depression. No one talked about the economy. Right. How's the economy doing? No one knew. It was, how's life in your small business around the farm? And the fact that we now ask all these people, how do you think about the economy? And you can slice and dice it a million different ways. It's probably not good for most people to even think about that.
Well, also everyone has their own economy.
Yes.
And that's the thing that they should focus on. How am I doing?
Yes.
But so I'm going to tell you something though. A lot of people who are not doing well, or they're dissatisfied with some other aspect of their life, or they're politically unhappy.
Yeah, you have the people who say, I'm doing great, but the economy's gone to shit.
Country's
you had
going
a lot of that.
So this is almost everybody that I talk to where I live. I've never seen these people make more money. They're literally, it never stops. Buy a house, buy a bigger house, boats, Europe. The economy's going to hell. So why? So why are you acting? Because that's not what they're really saying. What they're really saying is, I read the New York Post and I don't like Joe Biden, or I don't like this thing I heard about something that happened at my kid's school. They're not talking about the economy because they don't know about the economy. They don't know anything.
We just love to complain. It's like our national pastime.
Yeah. So people have their own economy, number one. Number two, when a survey person asks them a question, They don't even know what the question is. This is, are you in a good mood or a bad mood? Right.
Yeah, I think that's part of it. And I think there's a lot of legitimate economists, all across the spectrum that have said, okay, we really need to take into account how much, whether it's Conference Board or whether it's the UMichigan Consumer Sentiment Survey, how much of this has been broken by politics?
All of it.
All of it.
I don't know if it's all of it. And I don't know whether I'm trying too hard to sound.
Sorry. What was the thing that happened last week 2 weeks ago when Joe Biden dropped out of the race? The University of Michigan.
Joe Biden was the vibe session, Kyla.
Right. No, right. Literally, Joe Biden drops out of the race. The University of Michigan survey has its biggest 1 month jump ever. Yeah. This is like, to me, this is like really obvious in just talking to people. And it works the other way around too. Mm-hmm. So when Trump is in office and you ask people who don't like Trump how they think the economy's going, they think Trump is tearing it apart like Godzilla. Mm-hmm. And of course that's not what's happening.
No.
So everyone does a version of this.
Yeah.
It's universal. And we're allowing people's people's feelings about everything get concentrated into an answer about how do you think the economy's doing?
Yeah. I mean, so that's a great point. And then it leads back to like Ben's question of like, when is the data useful? Because it is so overwhelming. So you have to kind of pick your spots. I think that when we got to a point in the cycle where disaggregating for very particular things that just, right, if you just used a bar chart, you're like, wow, okay, well, 3/4 of this bar chart explaining what the components of inflation were, and core services X housing this month was auto insurance. It's like, okay, well, one, what is the, federal funds rate doing to auto insurance or not? And, what does this mean going forward? I thought that a man that we both really, that we all really respect, David Kelly, was right when he was one of the people that was like, David Kelly at JP Morgan, chief global strategist there, where he was just like, if you're not fading this, then you're just being irresponsible, especially when the labor market is, coming back into balance. And we see that in the quits rate, the hiring rate, and even in job openings and JOLTS, which I actually think, despite the hate that it's gotten, in part because of the low survey responses.
You think there's still value in things like the JOLTS?
Yeah, I mean, the survey response thing is tough. But I think that even though they are very human and they do make mistakes, they're working as best as they can to keep the data as reliable and as consistent as they can. And when you just look at it in terms of like, right, folks at firms like REMMAC, I think appropriately have just thrown out certain leading indicators. I think we all can agree that while Cam Harvey is a brilliant economist, that at least in this particular cycle, yield curve inversion, had a false positive.
He said that.
He said it's possible.
Yeah, and he was, had the intellectual humility that not all people have to say that.
One more thing before we move along. But all of the economists who got, quote unquote, got 2023 right were saying the same thing. Mm-hmm. The Fed's shelter data is a year out of date. Like every one of the people who was, including Renmac, including Neil Dutta, mm-hmm. everyone who was constructive on 2023 got the same thing right.
Yeah.
Like we already know that the shelter component of PCE or CPI are heading in the right direction because that's 1 year old data and we have newer data.
Right.
If everyone knows this, why are we still looking at the same?
Yeah. Well, now
if we have real time data in the internet age, why are we doing owner's equivalent rent on a 1 year lag?
So this is where I joined the Ben Carlson school of like objectively
of what, not taking a stance.
No. This was as I remember.
I've been taking some Fed stances.
Yeah. You've had some hot Fed stances.
Why? All right. So as the Fed's unofficial mouthpiece in the podcast realm, why is the Fed impervious to this thing that's being screamed in their face? Like you guys are focusing on lagged data when real-time data now exists for the most important component.
Explain yourself.
I do think that in some ways the Fed is a little out of touch on this stuff. And I think it's the human nature element. It's the only way I can, because everyone else is looking at the same data and talking about it. So I don't know what other explanation there is.
I think it's this. I think it's that it's July 2023. All the doves that are screaming soft landing, right? Whether they're, policy people, regular citizens are just really interested in the economy and politics, or, whoever. And it seems overdone. Core CPI is like either was still at 4 or above 4. I mean, it was hanging around there, right? And even if you think it's lagged, it's like, okay, I mean, be careful before you dismiss like, core CPI, which for a long time was just the sort of key anchor that you look at. Even if this cycle, it seems like it's funky because of certain ways that we couldn't have expected that shelter data is weird. But yes, you're like, wait, but this is an imputed price of OER of what a household that owns its home would pay if they were renters. That's odd. It's driving us basically from where we would be tenths of away from target to being off target. And
it's baffling.
It's baffling. And here's the thing they could have done. They could have taken on a really, really hard communications job to the press, to the public, to, let's be honest, a lot of times I think, and this is, I'm speaking not for my colleagues, but for myself, I think some of Fed credibility is, my peers who often appear on CNBC or Bloomberg or other formats like that, are they going to yell at me or not? Because as you said, Ben, they're human, and I think that's part of how consensus is formed. And that would have been a really hard case. That like, hey, if you look at these things and fade these things, we're pretty near target. We got immaculate disinflation. We basically had the labor market back at a 2019 level that people thought was unbelievable. Then, not everybody, but I mean, a lot of folks thought that was Goldilocks. So, hey, we're going to create another, in the same way that they did Supercore. They could have said, we're going to really focus on, let's take out OER. If they also took out auto insurance, that would have been really bold, right? You could have had a targeted case for doing that. People like Mark Zandi at Moody's were arguing for that. Ellen Zentner at Morgan Stanley. I don't know whether she was arguing for that, but she was certainly saying that the Fed risk.
What if they got overconfident because they just thought like, listen, we didn't have to do anything. We're gonna get a soft landing. Let's just keep letting this play out.
They felt they had room.
And then so they waited too long and now they're forced to act.
Well, have they?
So that's a great segue for where I want to go next. So through your talking to regular people, talking to business owners, traveling, you saw through the 2022 recession. You never believed in it. Yeah. No, but to your credit, you just that was just not what you were seeing on the ground.
No.
The most interesting thing that happened this summer was the growth scare that we just had.
Yeah.
And of course, that's now since been explained away and people are less worried about it. Mm-hmm. But I want to put this chart up. This is the Indeed chart. This is showing payroll gains were much slower than previously expected. So this is a period between April 2023 and March of 2024. But the point here is that this kind of thing happens. And then we start saying, oh, no, they missed or such and such. It was good, but it wasn't as good as we thought it would be. And then the narrative can change so quickly.
Right.
The reason I want to bring this up is we're like at this moment where it could absolutely tip over, but we can't interpret every single data release as being the beginning of the end.
Yeah.
But we're still going to do that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, come on. It's like we're
sort of going to do it anyway, but we know we should.
Wait, you have a Top Gun analogy in here? I got to hear this.
Oh, yeah. So I remember talking to Connor Senino, and I think your listeners will probably know who Connor Sen is, writes for Bloomberg, and also, knows a lot about finance and knows how to manage money. Great guy. And I was like, you know what this moment feels like? And this was, I think, January, where it was really sort of a close call between whether we knew that the January print would be hot for inflation, but there was a question of like, well, will it be just cool enough to where all these calls for the first rate cut in March still pan out?
Are you trying to say we're in the highway to the danger zone?
And exactly, and reminded me of Top Gun 2, which was like it's like my favorite movie of the past I don't know, like 5 years.
We're fans.
Yeah,
we're fans.
And do you remember that scene, right, where they've practiced it, in the middle of the desert a million times?
Go up vertically.
Yeah. So they practiced it in the middle of the desert a million times, but now actually I think they're in northern Iran or whatever.
No, they specifically don't say where they are.
Oh,
which is a whole other topic.
It's a faceless bad.
It's a faceless bad person with Russian overtones.
Yeah,
very, very clear to steer away from it possibly being China.
Right.
Like it could be anybody but China.
I think they were in Nevada.
The bad guys in Top Gun always have the visor that's blacked out, so you can't see their face.
Yeah. That's right. And no markings on the planes, and it's just
Tom Cruise knows what
nameless,
he's doing.
faceless. I think it's really meant to be Canada.
Yeah.
But they go very far to not tell anybody.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then so they have to essentially do this crazy maneuver, going the speed of light, where they're only 30 yards above the ground because they don't want to get hit by the radar. that these faceless enemies have. And then they have to cruise, still trying to avoid the radar at 1,000,000 miles an hour or whatever, I'm exaggerating, up the mountain, gaining, whatever, 8, 9 positive Gs, which is, crazy on the human body and really dangerous for the plane to be going that close to a cliff or a mountain, et cetera. And then, but it's necessary, right? Because of this threat, right?
Yeah.
Call that threat inflation. And then just as, you hit the top of the mountain, you also have to invert and pivot back down.
Right.
Because then the risk is
so you're not too tight. So you're not too tight at the absolute worst moment.
Exactly. And so they and that's what they're trying to do, and at first I thought they were going to try and do it. It seems like maybe based on whispers and,
so
and Fed reporting.
Are you ready to refer to Jay Powell as Maverick? Or are you not there yet?
It wouldn't be my job to say whether he's Maverick or not, but I do think we're in this really interesting liminal space.
Neil Kashkari is Iceman.
Okay.
Yeah. It's a fun, obviously I'm biased as like a huge nerd for this movie. I wanted to be a fighter pilot when I was young, and then I realized I get motion sick, so that was done. But we're in this really weird liminal period where either he will be cheered and he'll have really, landed the plane, and people will be like, we're being too tough on him. The FOMC's all right. You could easily see the market broaden out. We could see unemployment at 4%.
Well, you have a question here for us. You said, do you guys see the unemployment rate at 5% first or 4%? That's the big thing is the labor market.
Yeah.
I mean, what do y'all think? History would suggest it's going to be 5 before 4.
All right, so then Powell will be Charlie Sheen in Hot Shots landing the plane on the aircraft carrier where he just falls out of the sky.
Yeah.
It would be hard to see because I saw
what is
something.
The question? Do we see unemployment back under 4? No.
Yeah. So the way I've been framing this to folks just on the phone, it's like been an informal survey, I've been putting to people since the growth scare.
So you're saying like picture Miles Teller's mustache.
Yeah. Picture his mustache.
Did he have to have a mustache just because his dad had one? Was that a really key component to selling?
It worked for him though.
I still can't believe Meg Ryan wasn't in the movie.
So I would say this.
It's 5.
One of the things that we know is that
I don't know.
The size of the labor force is growing. Wages have grown large enough to pull people off who were not participating is one. And then 2, immigration has resumed.
Right.
We had no legal immigration for 2 years and no illegal immigration. And that's now changed.
Right.
And so the denominator is getting larger.
Right.
Which is why it's really hard for me to envision a situation where we go back to this there are 50 open jobs for every person.
But John, throw the labor force participation rate up here, the 25 to 54. This is one that is kind of perplexing to me. So prime age labor force participation rate, 25 to 54, is basically at all-time highs, which was last seen in 2000.
Yes.
And it's still going up. So how do you explain this as thinking the labor market is slowing? How do you explain that?
These people were playing video games. You understand? These were prime age workers not working. A, they didn't have to. There's a lot of stimulus in the economy. Or B, they were doing things that weren't necessarily full-time
and these are the people that are having a hard time finding a job.
Yeah, but they're not having a hard time anymore. But you're asking, like, how much bigger can the labor force get?
My question is, people keep saying the labor market is slowing, and obviously in certain data points it is, but this tells me that the labor market is still doing pretty well.
This is the denominator. This is the amount of people participating, right?
Yeah.
Is that
well, yeah. So I mean, it's a tug, right? So this is prime age labor force participation rate. It excludes both children because we got rid of child labor for the most part, and
super inflationary, by the way, getting rid of child labor. I have always said this on the show.
Yeah, I'm right there with you, brother.
So we're at 83%, which is very healthy.
Yeah, and that's a sign of economic vigor in some sense, Ben, because it's there are good enough jobs that are attracting folks into the labor force. It also means that if they're not able to find jobs relatively quickly, they'll not just be in the labor force, they will be considered unemployed because they are seeking a job, but they don't have one yet. And in that case, we're in this, again, really odd pivot point where if that continues for longer and longer and longer, well, then you get to 5% before 4% very quickly.
But the overall labor market is still healthy.
Yeah.
You have 5% unemployment, but more people working.
And that is what the labor market bulls who actually think that...
That's what Claudia Sam is saying.
I
know you spoke to.
Yeah. So, I'll divide that into two. So on the one hand, I totally get the labor market bulls who think also in terms of Fed policy that reason, positive labor force growth means that, okay, maybe the Fed does a slight adjustment, but we don't need to go back to 3.5, right? That's what they think. That's fair. But regardless of whether the labor force participation rate is going up because of native-born workers or because of immigration, you are really testing the waters, according to the SOM rule and other indicators, if you let unemployment go greater than a percentage point over its low during that cycle.
If it's at 5%,
politicians
are going to say, what are you doing? What's going on here?
If we're not in a recession and we got to 5%, it would be the most remarkable anomaly in American
so if you get to 5%, if you get to 5%, no one's going to want to hear, yes, it's 5%, but there's 2 million more people working than there were 2 years ago. That's not going to
or looking for work, right?
Looking for work, rather, in the labor force. Yeah. It's documented as being in the labor force.
Yeah, employed or
John, let's do the chart before this. Month over month change in total non-farm employment. This is what it looks like, the tipping point.
Right.
What are we looking at here?
This is just literally month over month change in NFP.
And the next chart should be farm employment, right?
So we're looking at the average. Yeah, it's slowing down.
Yeah.
So, all right. Anything left to say on the labor force or what? So you spoke to Claudia Som earlier this month.
Well, I have one thing left to say. It's confusing. Like, it's hard.
Of course it
is. It is.
Right? It's hard to figure out, like, what exactly is happening. There's so much noise.
Right.
The Munger quote, right? What do you say? If you're not confused, you're not paying attention.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, whenever I see super overconfident people in either newsletters or on television, and I've talked to them before, I think, okay, like if I have to figure out who to make a phone call for a story, maybe I don't call that person in, because I think that's sometimes it's just a signal of you really have a view, and sometimes it's your job to pitch your view, especially if you're in a certain role. Other times I think it's a sign that you're not paying close enough attention, and you probably should be confused. You should at least be hedging and qualifying.
There are times when a lot of the indicators are all saying the same thing.
Yeah.
Like up or down. And there's times like where we are right now where it's just like we're just not exactly sure because there's a lot of different conflicting signals.
And credit to Claudia, who I have to shout out as actually one of my intellectual mentors. Right before I stepped from behind the scenes, I was a staff editor at the Times on the editorial side. So you all know Steve Ratner, right? I edited his column. I edited Claudia when she wrote for the New York Times, and half the time she was like really schooling me than the other way around. So we have a personal relationship outside of the professional one where I call her and we like talk in a serious voice, like for a quote. And I talked to her, God, it must have been like a week ago or something. And she was doing the whole thing where she's just really trying to tell people that she, similar to Cam Harvey, isn't trying to wave the SOM rule flag and be like, I'm the greatest, look how great of a track record it has, and so you all should be very scared. Recession, downturn, doom is definitely coming. She said that it is, a red flag, but that there's no reason that due to the volatility of this cycle, her indicator could also be, quote unquote, proven wrong.
Also, it's being triggered from a very low level of unemployment.
Yeah.
So,
but at the end of the day, what I told her as a sort of like pitch of a way to think about what role the SOM rule could play is that she originally designed it for fiscal policymakers.
Yeah.
Right. This idea that the SOM rule catches you in the early innings of a recession, and or that's the empirical pattern. And the idea is, well, lawmakers in Congress at that point should all put aside their partisan beefs, LOL, and shoot out automatic stabilizers, right? Unemployment insurance is automatic stabilizer. There's, you could do checks, you could do a lot of things. But the idea was, Claudia was like, here you go, Congress. I'm a Fed economist. I'm not telling you what to do, but here's the framework. The pattern is clear. I think oddly, the role that it could play in this cycle and maybe in even future cycles is also give a, red flag or code red to the Fed, not tell it what to do, but say, hey, if you are tight, it might be a good time to consider.
I agree with that. And I actually think that they're probably paying attention because she's a former Fed official.
Yeah.
She's not like somebody screaming on TV.
Right.
she's somebody that's done research inside the building.
Right.
So, and they know there's not going to be any fiscal. There's not going to be anything coming from Congress before a recession. Yeah. They already know that. Yeah. So,
in a weird way, she could be like the D Wade, LeBron meme, right? Where D Wade tosses it up and then LeBron dunks it. Like in a weird way, people get freaked out based on labor market weakness because of the Somme rule. It's still early enough to where it seems like maybe it's too late. We'll find out. But the Fed reacts in time and they get a slam dunk. And then, Ben, Michael, you all talked about this. If they do pull this off, I think the idea that the Fed was both too late to go and then too late to act could turn into, hey, we're all human and like A-, B+.
But I don't think it's them pulling anything off. I think we did it. Like, if we have a soft landing, it's despite their efforts to crash us into a wall.
Yeah, I would say corporate America did more to keep us out of a recession by finding ways to continue the profit machine rolling.
Yeah.
I would argue the housing market did more by like just not completely going off the rails. Mm-hmm. Like it's not that anyone like tried to save the economy.
Jensen Wang saved the economy.
Yeah, people just going about their business and dealing with higher rates for borrowing.
Right.
Like and finding a way.
Right.
And that's what American style capitalist like does better than any other system is like everyone is profit motivated.
Yeah.
In the end.
Tal, you brought this chart, which I love. One of the wildest charts from the pandemic is non-financial corporate business, net interest, and miscellaneous payment. So you would have thought to the point of like, well, who's really impacted by higher interest rates? Well, actually, higher interest rates paradoxically sent net interest expense for these companies down.
Right.
Because crashed. They were earning so much more on their cash because all of their debt was already fixed and locked and loaded from 3 years prior.
Yeah. I showed this to some people and they did not believe
it's me. A brain melter.
And I was like, ooh, okay, that means I got to do a story.
Well, this could be homeowners too.
That's a signal to you that you should write about it.
Yeah. Immediately.
So what did you find?
I worked with my colleague, Joe Renison, who covers markets specifically for us. We snagged him from the FT, and he's been great to work with. I go to him with a lot of questions. And he was like, oh, yeah, no, we got to get into the weeds of like why and how this is happening. And essentially, it's a mixture of the fact that, if you look at both the support that corporate America got in the depths of the pandemic, both from Congress and the Fed. Microsoft was borrowing at what, 3%?
2.5%.
2.5%?
I think so.
Wow. They were borrowing like a AAA sovereign. Right. And they still are.
Okay. Even Carnival got like, I think low single digits.
Yeah. High yield companies were at like 5
High yield was 5.
Yeah. So that's great. And then you think, okay, well then that's all going to blow up because, those not as great credits, will run out of the ability to expand and keep customer sales going, and you'll get sort of delinquencies. But because of fiscal, I think in part, business was great, right? And then so while there's very very active debate about how much of fiscal was responsible for inflation, I think we also have to keep in mind that regardless of what percentage you assign to big fiscal, it's also true that it really healed the balance sheets of consumers and with PPP, small business, and it just drove everything forward. You're talking about 70% of the economy being connected to consumer spending, and then so when you are able to buy low in terms of
borrow low,
borrow low, and then business does really well immediately coming out of
borrow low, invest high. How much is we spoke about this recently? Yeah. Google is earning $30 billion a quarter on their cash. It's not quite that high, but it's something ridiculous.
Right. No, that's a great spread. If you
it's the same thing for consumers. If you refinance into a 3% mortgage in 2020 and you're earning 5% on T-bills, that's not everyone, but that's a lot of people.
You're like almost a hedge fund manager at that point. Right. Yeah. It's like a great spread trade that you accidentally put on.
You locked in an insanely low price on your biggest budget monthly item that you have to spend money on.
Yeah.
So that you were hedged from inflation on that.
Yeah.
Right? If you had the 3% mortgage. That's why consumers could still spend money.
And without beating a dead horse, that point you just made about it being a great inflation hedge, it's also why I think a lot of really smart economists thought that OER just didn't make as much sense, with that context.
Well, I was doing this, and so probably a lot of people were. I was prepaying my mortgage. And then I said, hey, wait a minute. What am I doing? Why am I prepaying my mortgage?
Why would you prepay a mortgage that you locked in at 3%?
Yeah, exactly. When I could just put the difference in money earning 5%.
Yeah.
Right. So everybody had their own personal carry trade that was fortunate enough to lock in their borrowing costs at high 2s, low 3s, which I don't know, you only had 4 years to do it. So there's plenty of time, or 3 years to do it.
Right.
And then to your earlier point, the amount of fiscal stimulus, whether it's 4 trillion, 7 trillion, there were 11 million PPP loans to businesses and only 10 million were paid. 10 million were never paid back. So only 1 million of those loans are paid back. So that's all money that's still with us in the system. So there's a lot of reasons for that. But I think the idea that like Apple, Alphabet, the amount of cash that they have on their balance sheet and now earning more on the cash than they're paying in interest is fascinating. We never could have envisioned that like in 2021 or 2022 as that being like one of the big takeaways from what happened. But that's literally what happened.
And it's not just corporate America. So Torsten Slok has a chart showing that money market funds currently pay around $500 billion in interest.
Right.
That's 2.5% of annual consumer spending.
Right. I mean,
let's put this up.
I look at that, and Slok and Apollo have been great tracking that issue. And
this is what it looks like. That's bananas.
Yeah, it's bananas. And Josh, we were right there with Rick Reeder.
Dude, I said it before Rick Reeder. Rick Reeder bit that from me. No.
No, Josh had that on TV and Gunlock laughed.
I think I saw that segment. Yeah.
This was like a year ago.
So So this doesn't apply to everyone, but for people that with a surplus of cash, who are earning a lot of money on their cash, there's going to be a wealth effect.
Yeah.
We could argue about the extent of it, but we can't argue that people don't feel more flush than they normally do.
Yeah.
And that's after 15 years of no interest.
Yeah.
So now all of a sudden you have money in the bank and it's earning you a ton of money. It's like, it's not the stock market wealth effect, but it's not nothing.
It shouldn't happen that your real estate, your home could be at an all-time high, your stock portfolio could be at an all-time high, and the interest on your money market could be at a multi-decade high.
Why not?
It's a triple play.
I'm saying you wouldn't anticipate higher rates, and then also
it almost seems too good to be true.
It's Goldilocks for the consumer.
Take away the inflation, and that was the 1990s, basically.
Yeah.
Right?
I mean, I think that was a big part of consumer price insensitivity. I mean, that was in terms of just, being humble rather than taking a victory lap on, 2022, because this has been an incredibly hard cycle. There's stuff I've gotten wrong. That was something I got wrong. I was sort of in the school of thought that not that consumer price insensitivity and margins would fully, revert, but I thought it would cool off a bit. And then whether it's just, anecdotal stuff or not anecdotal, because I've actually, been on the road for 2 weeks and I've been, following the sort of households that have been in the top quintile, or whether it's just sort of looking at the data, listening to earnings calls with the help of Quarter, shout out to Quarter. It was just like,
we love the Quarter shout out.
Yeah.
But Todd, don't you
rich people were just spending. And then I'm not rich, I'm upper middle class, but I've seen, I remember just being so euphoric about being able to go out again in 2021.
Yeah.
And it was I was like, hold on a second, pints are $11 now? And I was just like, nah, I'm out. I'm happy to see my buddies again. And it's just like, what are you going to do? Not.
But it all comes back to the labor market.
Yeah.
People aren't going to change their spending habits if they're employed.
I think that's true.
For the most part.
I largely agree with that. We're going to jump ahead and this thing that Ben wrote, How to Predict the Recession. So this is particularly poignant now. And what you're not saying here, Ben, is that there's not going to be a recession. But you're sarcastically saying how to predict the recession. And then you're showing us all of these recession calls. And one of the main points that you made, which I loved, is that for all of the screaming about recessions in the last 15 years, we've only been in one for a couple of months. What's the actual data?
Well, literally 1% of the time in the last 15 years, we've been in a recession.
When did that recession take place? Was I here for it?
COVID, right?
COVID.
It was
That's
2
it.
months. But
okay.
Isn't that part of the reason why?
Hold on. Let me quote you. In 15 years, the U.S. economy has been in a recession for 2 months. That's 1% of the time since July 2009, meaning we avoided a recession 99% of the time. This helps explain why people have been predicting a recession for so long. It feels like we're due. There have been 11 recessions since 1950. That's one every 7 years or so on average. But we just haven't had it. And maybe we'll have it next year. I don't know. Maybe the year after. But the point is, we have continued recession calls, I would say every week over this stretch of time. and we've avoided it the entire time.
Is it possible a lot of the consumers and households were beat over the head with recession predictions in 2022, and the fact that it never happened, and that they almost like wanted that release because it's like, well, I wouldn't have lost my job, someone else would have, and I would have been fine. And it's like people just almost wanted to like just get it out of the way and just come on, get on with it already. Then we'll move on, and it hasn't happened yet.
There were a recession in like certain industries, like obviously anything mortgage related, done. Yeah. A lot of
venture capital.
A lot of venture capital tech layoffs.
That's how you're not wrong with a recession prediction, though. You go, well,
Sure.
there were rolling recessions.
Recessions.
There's always been rolling recessions,
Right.
in some field.
Manufacturing had obviously, we all lived through it. Huge boom because good spending was all that a lot of people could or wanted to do for a bit. And then when everybody was just like, no, I'm going to go hang with my folks, my friends, my family, and have experiences. And you already, how many grills can you buy? How many Nikes can you buy? How many fill in the blank?
Well, I thought we were due for that reason. In late 22, I was in the recession camp. And one of the reasons was I was thinking about comps.
Right.
And I was thinking about how many people bought shit in 2021 and 2022
right.
who would, no way they're going to buy it again next year.
Right.
So I was just thinking of it more like mathematically, it's absurd to think that we could have a boom like that and no bust.
Right.
And
manufacturing did have a bust.
Yeah, we had a bust in the stock market too. So we just didn't have this thing where everyone got laid off.
Right.
That was the missing component. And
Right.
Michaels was saying that all along is you can't have a recession sub 4% unemployment.
Right.
How is that a recession? In what way is that a recession?
And consumers took way longer to push back against the higher prices. It finally happened, I guess, this year to some of these big brands. Yeah. But that took a lot longer than people thought would. I think.
So we put in the doc something about discounting. I saw a headline today that Walmart Plus, starting this week, Walmart Plus, this is from the Journal, members will get 25% off all digital orders at Burger King.
Wait, what the hell is Walmart Plus?
They have 8 million members.
It's like the Amazon Prime. I use it.
You do?
Is there like a Walmart Mandalorian on there?
They ship you stuff from Walmart.
Wait, you're a Walmart Plus member?
I signed up for it because one of my American Express cards said, hey, if you sign up for it, we'll pay for it.
Oh, but it's same thing as Amazon Prime, free shipping?
Same thing, and it's cheaper.
Okay.
It's free shipping.
All right.
Same day delivery sometimes.
Maybe I'm more
but a lot of these
out of touch.
Consumer discretionary stocks relative to the market are getting not hammered, but they're not doing great. And a lot of them didn't know where the line was on how far they could raise prices. And a lot of them overdid it. Starbucks, McDonald's, a lot of these companies got into a lot of trouble.
Do you all think they over-earned, right, that term? Like you saw that you could push price, you saw you could push price, and then, right, as I've heard the term, it's just like, okay,
yes.
well, you push it and then you lose consumer loyalty because eventually you piss people off.
Yes,
Yeah.
it happened.
I don't know. Maybe people will.
Yes, it did happen.
It happened at Starbucks, Chipotle, McDonald's.
I've literally know anecdotally people are like, I can't stand Starbucks anymore just because of the price and the wait in line.
Well, so the price is absurd, but taking 15, 20 minutes to make an iced coffee at an airport Starbucks is an absurd experience.
Yeah.
But I do think that's right. I think they over-earned. And the Democrats are trying to make that point. Kamala Harris's platform, in part, is taking aim at supermarkets and food service companies. Mm-hmm. I think because that's probably the thing that consumers scream about the most.
Oh, wait a minute. I want to do maybe not a mea culpa, but Ben and I spoke on Animal Spirits this week about price gouging or inflation. And I think we're all probably in favor of this. What my understanding is that they're not talking about price controls. They're talking about price gouging. Mm-hmm. When there is a hurricane, they don't want Walmart to be able to jack up prices. And I think most reasonable people would say, yeah, who would disagree with that?
Yeah.
They're not trying to control prices at the supermarket.
Yeah. So, I think there was this, there's the policy that was announced. And then I think there was this sort of outsized reaction to it, honestly, by some people that did not read the actual policy. And then you could critique the policy because it wasn't like this hyper.
We debate policy on headlines alone now.
Right. but am I right? Are they trying to literally make supermarkets lower their prices, or is it
no?
Right?
So so it's like two levels to it. Like some people,
I know Elizabeth Warren is going after them,
right? Well, so a perfect example is so I don't know exactly where Elizabeth Warren stands on this, but one of the things that you can never critique, Elizabeth Warren about is that she's hyper detailed. Right, it's not just an announcement. It's not a press release. It's like here's the exact percentage point that this tax or et cetera, whatever will be, and that was going pretty well for her in 2020 until it didn't. But very smart person, also very polarizing for a number of reasons. You cannot say that the Harris campaign and sort of now the Biden-Harris administration, right? Because we're in the twilight of
it's a weird thing.
It's a weird thing.
Yeah.
Anyway, you cannot say that they were detailed. And some of the critiques were like, look, well, you can't say something this polarizing and not be detailed. But I think I saw a lot more reaction that clearly is you just looked at the headline.
It's like
you saw cable.
But they're doing the same thing with the capital gains tax rate. She's not pinning herself down to a number.
Right.
So they're imagining the worst.
Right.
Unrealized cap gains, is that?
Yeah, 100%. We're going to make unrealized cap gains 100%.
But did she say that?
No. So
I know not that.
No. So I looked at the price gouging proposal. I didn't look at the did everybody looked at it? I looked at it in passing. I didn't look at the unrealized gains one. But from what I understand,
who's against? Who's for price gouging?
I'll help here.
Wait, who's for price gouging?
I'll help here. No one's for price gouging. It's ideological. We actually did try price controls.
You're
in the
ticket
past,
broker,
and they haven't worked. They haven't worked well. But this is ideological. It's not. I'm pro gouging. It's that where do you draw the line and decide what's being opportunistic and taking price versus what's gouging? That's where if you're a libertarian, you're saying the market will sort it out. There's no need for anyone to say anything about someone else's price because if the price is too high, a competitor will come along with a lower price. So it's ideological. It's not an actual debate.
And 40 states have some form of price gouging law. I mean that's really important to keep
here's
in mind.
All right, here's price gouging. Martin Shkreli says this $7.50 dose of insulin is now going to be $750.
Right.
Why? Because I bought the company that has the patent. That's price gouging. Nobody is pro that. Republicans aren't pro that. This is more about who's to say that the Harris administration gets to decide that I can make 20% selling batteries during a hurricane, but not 21%.
Yeah.
Where's the line?
Well, I mean, these are live issues, right? We don't have to look that far into the past. Like I believe Lysol got in trouble.
Purell, toilet paper.
Right.
Pandemic.
Lysol distributors, because people were freaking out in New York during the pandemic because they go to the bodega and this is back when you thought it was touch. I think fomites is what it was called, and we find out it's mostly airborne, right? And it's like whatever 10x the price. And then, the bodega owners, the corner store people, wherever you get your groceries, were like, no, we swear it wasn't us, which sometimes it is also the retailers. But in this case, the, New York AG's office, I believe, dug into it, and it turned out, oh no, actually it was the distributors that were, egregiously taking price. And if you look at whether it's Kentucky, Idaho, or yes, New York, which is a blue state. I mean, they have very similar language around where you jump from, just covering your costs and maintaining your previous margin to what
Can I say something though? It's
gouging.
Weird to pick on supermarkets.
Seriously,
this is the lowest margin industry God has ever allowed to exist.
I mean, I think that's where
a weird place for them to start.
I think that's where the
politics
everyone. Comes in, and
can we do auto insurance first?
$86 tequila. There should be price controls on that.
Can we do an añejo tequila first? That was a weird thing. Tal, I want to make sure we get to a couple other things here.
Yeah.
So one thing I wanted to ask you about was your travels through Pennsylvania.
Yeah.
So this was my favorite thing that I've seen you do. Not that I don't read all your stuff because I do, but I love this idea of just talking to regular people.
Yeah.
Are you going to do more of that this year? How do you decide where you want to go?
And who do you talk? How do you talk to?
How do you get people to do people just want to talk, or how does that work?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's a mixture of things. I mean, you go in with a general plan based on, for example, I mentioned how I saw a data point about how corporate net interest payments were actually plunging during a rate hiking cycle.
Yeah.
Oh, that's a story. At the same time, if you see, oh, hold on, Nebraska has the lowest unemployment rate in the country, and it's near record lows across cycles. Might be worth going there. So it's a data point that usually sparks it. In the case of Pennsylvania, it was actually performing in terms of state GDP ahead of the country. And this is...
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah. So this is 2023 to 2024 year over year. And I was like, that's interesting. And the unemployment rate was doing well, and business starts were doing very well. And how people rated the Pennsylvania economy was doing pretty well in terms of state level sentiment surveys.
Yeah.
And yet there was the national disconnect. And obviously it's a very important swing state, right? Consumer sentiment has this sort of policy and politics knock on, because if people in Pennsylvania decide, I don't care what the numbers say, I hate the economy, that's going to affect what happens in November, and what happens in November.
It's one of the 4 states that really matters.
Right. And like what I care about is not what happens in November because of, rah this team or rah that team. Like, that could have real consequences for what policy is in 2025. So that's why I found it interesting.
So you pull up in the parking lot at Hershey Park, and then what happens?
I pull up everywhere, man. So I first I got on Amtrak, took the Keystone line, and then I spent some time around, Bryn Mawr, that sort of area.
How do you approach somebody that you want to talk to?
You can usually tell who wants to be approached. Other times there's just the natural social lubrication. Sometimes
but you're not wearing a vest that says journalist like you're in a war zone.
No.
So you have to kind of tell people like, hey, I'm doing a story.
So the way I approach it is like, for example, one of the first people I met when I was in Harrisburg, in Altoona, was this guy that just seemed very friendly. Kind of gave me a friendly nod as he was working on 2 laptops in Barnes & Noble. And I was just like, I got a friendly nod. We made eye contact. I'm going to go talk to him. Within 2 minutes or so, I will let him know I'm a journalist and I work for the New York Times. But like, I just try to let conversation flow at first. Now, in a very formal setting or something that's high stakes, you absolutely should let people know from the jump.
Are there people who, when you introduce yourself and where you work, who just, no matter what, just don't want to talk to you as a result of that, or not really?
I don't really see a lot of that. And I don't know whether that's because I usually introduce myself as a business or economics journalist. Maybe if you're like, hi, I'm a...
That's smart. That's actually smart of you to do that. Because
I don't know if I do that on purpose.
Probably hits different.
Yeah. But another thing about American consumers, American voters, American people is like, generally folks are pretty sweet, or if not sweet, they're, curious if they have time, right? I mean, people are in a rush. People have kids. They're either in the middle of work or on their way to work. You totally understand that. But if I'm at a hockey game, if I'm in a dive bar, off some random highway route, people are pretty open to talking.
You ever run into somebody that actually says something that's like really poignant or surprising? Or you have?
Oh, I mean, that's the best part about what I do is like, I always, as a writer, right? I'm a reporter, but in some ways, I'm also a writer. And you want to think that you'll have like the, chef's kiss line to sum up something that's going on that you're covering.
Right.
But usually when I do a story that's supposed to be, this part of the country, or these sorts of people are a microcosm of this broader macroeconomic trend sort of stories, it's the people that I talk to that give me the like perfect line. And so I remember this one woman in Pennsylvania, she was really representative of a lot of this conversation. On the one hand, she worked as a hotel manager, was making good money, but, they gave her one raise at the start of the pandemic, didn't give her another, but because they were understaffed, she got more and more work.
More hours.
Yeah, more hours, more in work, but not necessarily in pay. And she was like, you know what? I don't need this. I have enough savings. To leave. I have a good fixed mortgage. I want to spend more time with my daughter who's in high school. And she spent I think the past year going to 2 or 3 Taylor Swift concerts, like not just the one in Pennsylvania. She flew other places, and those tickets are expensive.
Yes.
But at the same time, when I asked her what she thought about the economy, and not in any of these politically charged ways we've been talking about, but just like as somebody that has experienced the past 3 or 4 years, she was just thinking about I don't know exactly what it is, but whether it's the fact that, we had to deal with our kids in Zoom school, a lot of people had divorces or breakups, and, she just listed all the things. I was like, yep, remember that. The variants, yep, remember that. Remember mask.
Right.
Like, it's been a lot. And I think, we should all be proud of ourselves that with some level of sanity, we've gotten through it. And she summed it up though, with this sort of poignant point of it feels like somebody, it's related to my snow globe thing, but this is so much more original. It feels like somebody put us in the washer machine and put us through a cycle, and then, kind of forgot to take us out. And we're kind of just sitting there clothes are, when you wash them, it's kind of smelly, kind of damp. But then she mentioned, I feel like enough time is passing and that, folks, at least in her network, are feeling better. Whether that ends up showing up in the sort of macro level soft data, I don't know. It's literally something that, just like with the labor market, we'll have to see.
Damn, that is a good analogy.
Tal Smith, ladies and gentlemen. Can I pitch you a story? I want to send you to Grand Rapids. I want you to find out what's going on there.
Yeah.
I'm going to introduce you to upper middle class people like Ben, and I want you to really dig in.
Yeah.
And just see what makes them tick and how they're feeling about it.
What's with all the modern farmhouses in Grand Rapids?
What would Tal learn if he were to appear in your neck of the
Beer
woods?
City, USA. We have the best beer in the country.
But how, what's
the
vibes? I'm saying.
Oh, we're doing well.
You don't talk to anybody that you live around, do you?
Yeah.
This guy's when I want to talk to you, I'll put you on my podcast.
No one come there. It's fine. I don't want a lot of traffic. I was telling him before we got on, how are there not more fist fights on the streets here with people looking at their phones and texting all the time? I'm a
pro fist fight.
I am an elite walker when it comes to dodging people in crowds.
As am I.
I can't believe the amount of people who just
Well, they're
stand in the
tourists.
middle
They're
of.
tourists. Those are not New Yorkers.
They don't mind. They bump into each other. They're like
Yeah.
toys. They
Like
bounce off
zombies
each
on their
other.
phone,
Everyone's okay.
You
Tom,
don't have that in Grand Rapids. There's not that many people.
You have fun on the show today?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Flew
Dude,
by.
thank you so much. Thank you so much for coming through. And I just want to tell you, I really enjoy your work, and I learn a lot about how people are experiencing the economy away from Wall Street.
Yeah.
Because most of what I consume throughout the course of the week is like research.
Right.
Right. So when you're speaking to people and relaying that to the reader, I think it goes a long way. And we really appreciate it. Thank you.
I want to do a favor to mine before we get out of here. John.
Okay.
John, throw this up.
You got somewhere to be?
So, no, we do have somewhere to be. We're,
That's true.
we're contributing to the inflation.
That's right.
There's an account on Instagram. The handle is, this is a weird handle. RKOH. I'm sorry, it doesn't even matter. It's a bunch of letters. RKOH. So they show like film premieres from back in the day.
Oh, this is
And
sweet.
this was
I'm into this.
this was Aliens, the premiere of Aliens in 1986. Tia Carrera.
Wow.
Who are these people?
Sigourney Weaver.
Marley Matlin.
Obviously.
Where's Sigourney? Oh, there she's like
In the red.
No, the light. I can't see it. Okay. Next, guy with the mustache. Is that Bill Paxton? No, it's not Bill Paxton. Is it? No. Guy with the stash.
Well, wait.
Paul Reiser?
It is Bill Paxton. His name is
That
right
was
there.
Bill Paxton.
This is this is definitely your flu game. You can't see.
I can't see. There was lights on that. Anyway, this is a great follow, and we'll link to it in the show notes.
That's a cool account. I think the 3 eyes are 3.
I don't know.
I think it's R. Key O'Hara the third. Like that's the
R.K. O'Hara the third, ladies and gentlemen.
right?
Yeah.
Right.
Love,
All
right off
love
the
that.
tongue.
Love that account.
All right, Shazna, Ben, have you a book or
I have
a
a book.
detective novel
This
or
one-
something to
I
share
have a
with
book.
us?
This is for Duncan and all the cinephiles out there.
Okay.
I think you guys talk about the Pulp Fiction rewatchables, and they talk about Tarantino on that. I haven't read it yet, so I started reading the Quentin Tarantino book called Cinema Speculation. Came out in 2022, and Duncan always gets on me for not watching the classic movies from like the 60s and 70s, and I can't do it because they feel too old.
Like what? What do you get
He
on him
wants to
for
see
not watching?
Casablanca.
No, listen. So
Like Sunset Boulevard. I was telling him about that a while back.
okay,
and
so
good one.
so I just can't go back that far because my movies for me start when I was born in the 80s. So, but Tarantino explains, and I think I understand the reason why, because all these movies in the 60s and 70s did stuff that helped create the movies of today. And he explains how these movies did this thing first. And it then we built on it and it got better. It's really good. He talks about these old Steve McQueen movies that I've ever seen, and Paul Newman and Warren Beatty, and he's going through all these movies in the 60s and 70s. And he's like hard on some of them too. He tells how he like this person shouldn't have been in it. They were a terrible actor.
Yeah.
But it's
Wait, so where is this?
called Cinema Speculation. It's a book.
Oh, it's a book.
And
Okay.
he just writes about all the movies that he grew up seeing, and it's fantastic. It's
Well,
so good.
one of the things about Tarantino is if you're a cinephile, he's one of your favorite directors
Right.
because of how the reverence with which he goes back and refers to these old movies.
Yes.
So if you really know film and you watch a Tarantino film, there's like 30 Easter eggs planted there just for you.
He talks about how he started going to see movies like once or twice a week at age 6 with his parents.
Yeah.
And he still has like a photographic memory of all these movies. This book is awesome.
What part of you thinks that Ben Carlson would appreciate Sunset Boulevard in real life? You can't possibly think he would like that.
I think he would like it.
I know why you like
And
it.
Citizen Kane. I was trying to get him to watch Citizen Kane.
So
You
what
would
part
like-
of
you
Citizen
might like
Kane
that.
do you think Ben
it's
would
literally
like?
a business.
It's black and
it's
white.
a business movie.
It's black and white. He's
Oh,
not
black and
it's
white,
a
yeah.
non-starter for Ben. You edit the show, you know this. Duncan,
Okay, we'll colorize a version of it. For
can we
him.
colorize Citizen Kane for Ben?
Did you watch Chinatown?
I did watch Chinatown.
did, right?
Yeah.
Not so great.
I'm going to try some of
Overrated.
them.
Overrated.
Yeah, I agree.
But it came first and it did stuff
So
that other
that's
movies
the
had never
point.
done.
At
By
the
the
time,
standards
okay,
of the
fine.
day that it came out, it was groundbreaking.
It's like an NBA player in the 50s that couldn't play
Yeah,
today.
yeah, yeah.
It's
But
Bob Pettit.
back then, yeah.
15th anniversary today
Wow.
of Inglorious Bastards.
That's a good one.
I have to go back and rewatch that.
Oh,
one, I
Remember this
think.
one? versus
the best.
So we saw some Long Island Wise guys did in Long Island with this, and we say we're on Long Island. So in Long Island is huge.
Hold on. I don't want to run over time because now we have to get to this event. I should be like an honorary Long Islander now.
Why?
Say more.
So
I might allow it.
So the wonderful woman that I'm with, Natalie, used to be in Colorado. We were long distance for a while, which wasn't bad for me. Honestly, being in Colorado like half the time is sweet. She moved back to New York. Great. Then I was like, oh man, but the job that she has to be in Long Island,
on
like
Long
Central
Island.
Ice.
Why? What
Central
is she, a jet ski
on
repairman?
Long Island.
What does she do that she has to be on Long Island?
She's a federal clerk in the Eastern District of New York.
She settles disputes about bagels and pizza.
Pizza inspector.
Pizza inspector and people doing.
Wait, so did you move to Long Island? Wait, are you about to tell us you moved to Long Island?
Not quite. I still live on the Upper West Side. Well,
Okay.
I just doxed myself.
I love it up there.
But I didn't know. Like, I'll be honest. I had a little bit of Manhattan, Brooklyn supremacy. Like,
You were not familiar with our game.
which was ridiculous because I don't even own anything in Manhattan, Brooklyn. Like, how are you going to be snobby about something that you have no assets?
Right.
But I went out there. So she's in Rockville Center, which doesn't have a hoity-toity reputation at all. But it's actually like this wonderful community.
Easy. Rockville Center is Irish Roslyn.
Yeah, I know, and I got to go back there.
The highest end Irish-dominated town.
This
on
is
all
Josh's
of Long
best
Island.
take on Long Island.
No, truly.
Rockville Center is a cool spot.
Rockville Center is 4 towns away from where Michael and I live. We're on the same train line.
Yeah.
No,
Okay.
Merrick. 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 So it's Rockville Center, and then Baldwin, then Freeport, then Merrick.
So I'm over there a lot, and I gotta say, like Lake Hempstead, right?
Okay.
Park, amazing. Like up there with the best parks in New York.
What about food? Where are you eating when you're in Rockville Center?
There's this. I don't even know the name of the spot. It's in this strip mall, but there's a great pizza spot right off of Center Avenue. I'm sorry to this pizza spot.
Get the wings at Croxley.
Mother Kelly's.
I've been to Croxley's before.
Croxley, great wings. Go to Mesita for Mexican.
Okay. See these guys sitting up as they're talking about food.
Mesita's good Mexican.
All right, we could do this for hours. So that's shout out to Long Island as your favorite because I like it.
That and The Century of Self, which is this BBC film by Adam Curtis, and it basically features the rise of the PR industry, which it really didn't exist before. It's like 10 parts. People can look it up. I think it's still mostly on YouTube, and it's a crazy story. He's like the nephew of Sigmund Freud. It's one of those things where it's a rabbit hole that you go down, and it's not one of the sort of sort of squeamish or boring documentaries. It really is sort of exhilarating.
The center of self.
The Century of Self. It's about
Century of Self.
It's about basically the rise of PR and the creation of want.
My kid just went to school to study public relations, so I'm all in. I'm going to watch it. Mine is The Singularity is Nearer by Ray Kurzweil, and it's about humans merging with AI. This is like Ray Kurzweil is like the godfather of writing about AI. He's been predicting a lot of the things that we're living through now for 20 some odd years. And the book is really, really well done. It just explains so much that you're going to need to understand as all these innovations come our way. And I'm not an AI scientist, obviously, so it's really helpful for me to be able to speak about it. All right, that's it from us this week. Big special thanks to John, Duncan. Nicole is away this week, but we missed her. Graham, Rob, Chart Kid Matt, Sean, everyone who works on the show, thank you guys so much. Thanks to our special guest, Talmon Smith. Where can people follow you? Give us your handles.
Thanks. I'm just at Talmon Smith, Talmon Smith on Twitter. And subscribe to the New York Times.
Subscribe to the New York Times. My God.
Thank you all.
Special thanks to Michael Batnick, battling a migraine today. We appreciate you. Thank you. And to Ben Carlson, thank you for joining us this week. All right, that's it from us, guys. We're out. Thanks for listening. Talk to you soon.